Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever made a mistake that somehow turned out to be the absolute best thing you ever did? Usually, when we think of famous architecture, we picture precision, perfect geometry, and flawless execution. But today, we're looking at a structure that completely flips the script on perfection. We're exploring the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But I want you to look at this landmark a little differently today. Don't just think of it as a static building. I want you to see it as a dynamic, living character, one whose entire existence is built on an absolute foundation of irony.
It really is a fascinating question, isn't it? How exactly did a catastrophic engineering failure become one of the most beloved global icons, drawing over 5 million visitors a year? Well, throughout this explainer, we're going to trace what I like to call the paradox arc. We'll discover how the exact things that doomed this tower from day one are the very same things that literally saved it from total destruction over the centuries.
Section 1. A flawed architectural icon. We're taking the vital signs of our towering patient. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand the paradox, we first have to understand the sheer massive scale of the problem. 14,500. That is the estimated weight in tons of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Imagine that immense weight resting entirely on a mere 3-meter foundation set into weak, highly unstable subsoil. From an engineering standpoint, this wasn't just a slight miscalculation. It was a total disaster waiting to happen. The ground simply could not support the ambition of the structure.
And you can literally measure the consequences of that soft soil. If you measure the tower from the ground today, you'll find it's 55.86 meters tall on the low side, but 56.67 meters on the high side. That's nearly a meter of difference just in its height profile alone. And keep in mind, the walls at the base of this structure are an incredible 2.44 meters thick. What we have here is a heavy, dense cylinder of white marble that's been slowly, unevenly sinking into the earth since the 12th century.
What's somewhat hilarious about its global fame today is that the tower was never actually meant to be the main attraction. It's a campanile, which is simply a freestanding bell tower. It was designed merely as a supporting accessory to the stunning Pisa Cathedral and the baptistry right there in the piazza. Yet, because of its colossal flaw, the sidekick ended up completely stealing the show.
Section 2. 2 centuries of construction, a timeline of fortunate delays. To truly understand how it survived its own creation, we have to look at the timeline, because this was definitely not a quick build. The construction of the tower is a 199-year saga of starts, stops, and incredible historical luck. The foundations were laid in 1173, during a time of great prosperity. But by 1178, when they hit the second floor, the tower was already visibly sinking into the ground. Construction was forced to halt, and it didn't just halt for a few weeks, it stopped for nearly a century. The Republic of Pisa became continuously engaged in bloody, protracted battles with Genoa, Lucca, and Florence. They simply didn't have the resources to keep building. It finally resumed in 1272, was halted again due to the Battle of Meloria in 1278, saw its 7th floor completed in 1319, and finally got its bell chamber in 1372. This long, drawn-out timeline reveals a profound historical irony. The very wars that plagued the Republic of Pisa were the accidental saviors of its greatest monument. If Pisa had experienced an era of continuous peace and prosperity, the builders would have rapidly stacked all that heavy marble right to the very top, and the tower would have almost certainly toppled over under its own rapidly accumulating weight. Those violent decades of war forced a pause that allowed the soft underlying soil to compress and settle just enough to keep the whole thing standing.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the architects tried to fix the problem when construction finally did resume. Master builder Giovanni di Simone realized the tower was leaning heavily. So, to compensate, he and his engineers simply built the upper floors taller on the low side to try and visually straighten it out. Because of this makeshift fix, the Leaning Tower of Pisa doesn't just lean, it's actually curved. It has a slight, deliberate bend to it, almost like a giant banana.
Section 3. Surviving War and Gravity. Bullets, cannonballs, and near misses.
Surviving its own construction was just the first hurdle. Let's shift our narrative to the tower's truly bizarre luck in surviving historical events that absolutely should have destroyed it. This thing has practically been a ticking time bomb of history. In the late 1500s, Galileo Galilei supposedly used its precarious tilt to drop cannonballs of different masses, proving his laws of freefall. But fast forward to World War II and the stakes got much, much higher. The Allied forces were advancing through Italy and suspected that German troops were using the tower's incredible vantage point as an observation post to track Allied movements.
Because of this suspicion, the historic monument was officially targeted for a potential, completely devastating artillery strike.
It all came down to a single human moment. A 23-year-old U.S. Army sergeant named Leon Wexton was sent out to confirm the presence of German troops and call in the artillery. But as he looked through the heat shimmer at the piazza, he was struck by awe. He was so utterly impressed by the breathtaking beauty of the cathedral and its leaning campanile that he hesitated, and he actually refrained from giving the order. That split second of human appreciation for art spared the tower from being blown into dust.
Section 4. Saving the Sinking Tower. The 1990 Rescue Mission.
Human intervention saved it in the 1940s, but by the late 20th century, physics was rapidly catching up. Gravity doesn't take days off, folks, and the tower's tilt was accelerating toward disaster. In 1989, another historic Italian structure, the Civic Tower of Pavia, suddenly and tragically collapsed. This sent absolute shockwaves of panic through the engineering community. At this point, the Leaning Tower of Pisa had reached a terrifying tilt of 5.5 degrees. It was literally on the razor's edge of tipping over entirely. Realizing the immediate existential threat, authorities took the unprecedented step of closing the tower to the public on January 7, 1990, and evacuated nearby residences.
So the crucial point is how they actually stopped gravity from ridding. They didn't use brute force. It was an incredibly elegant three-part engineering recipe. First, they removed the 7 heavy bells from the top to instantly relieve some of the top heavy weight. Second, they anchored 870 tons of lead counterweights to the raised base to act as a massive anchor. And finally, the most delicate part, they slowly siphoned out 70 metric tons or 38 cubic meters of soil from underneath the high side, essentially coaxing the tower to sink back into a safer alignment.
All of that immense effort, over a decade of painstaking engineering, resulted in a correction of just 45 centimeters. That's about 17.5 inches. It sounds tiny, I know, but that 45-centimeter shift was everything. It safely rewound the clock, returning the tower to the exact angle it leaned at way back in 1838.
The rescue mission was a triumphant success. The tower was proudly reopened to the public in December 2001. Engineers boldly declared the structure would be stable for at least another 3 centuries. In fact, by 2008, sensors showed that the tower had stopped moving entirely for the first time in its 800-year history.
Section 5. The Earthquake Survival Paradox. Irony at its finest.
But wait, because the irony of this structure doesn't end with gravity. Let's move to the final, most mind-bending twist of this explainer. Its baffling survival against the violent forces of nature. Italy is a highly seismic region. Since the year 1280, the Leaning Tower has been subjected to at least 4 massive, highly destructive earthquakes. Think about how absurd that is for a second. A building that is practically falling over on a calm, sunny day gets violently shaken by an earthquake, and yet it remains standing while modern buildings around it suffer catastrophic damage. How is that even possible?
In 2018, engineers finally solved the mystery. It all comes down to a phenomenon called dynamic soil-structure interaction, and this brilliantly illustrates the magic of physics. The towering height and the rigid marble stiffness of the building, combined with that incredibly soft foundation soil, actually change the vibrational characteristics of the tower. Essentially, the building does not resonate with earthquake ground motion. The soft soil acts like a giant shock absorber.
This brings our paradox perfectly full circle. The very flaw that cursed the tower, that terrible, soft, muddy soil that caused the severe lean and brought it to the absolute verge of collapse, is the exact same reason earthquakes haven't shaken it to rubble. The poison was also the cure. It's a true architectural miracle driven entirely by a mistake.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If the engineers of 173 had surveyed the land properly, dug a deeper foundation, and found solid bedrock, Pisa would just have a completely normal, straight bell tower. It wouldn't be a global icon. Millions of people wouldn't travel across the world to take pictures pretending to hold it up. So I ask you, is it possible that perfection is forgettable, but a beautiful mistake can last forever? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you on the next one.